Welcome, everyone. Nolan Bowerly here. Good morning. Almost forgot my mic again. Let me make sure this is going well. There's a million things to do. Not even a million. There are like 5 things to do before you go live on this thing, and I can't get them right and in the right order, and we'll see how often I forget this mic. But welcome, everyone. Welcome. Episode 4 of The Breakup, a show where we talk about why, how, take the frame of breaking up with the Fiat system, with the political order. What we're looking to do here is laugh at how pathetic some of these folks are and these institutions are, and how far they've been degraded and how useless they really are. So today I want to talk about a great boomer, just one of the greatest boomers ever, Cher. Cher. She's been around for a long time, probably has a lot to teach us all, has experienced some of the, most satisfying things the world has to offer, I would imagine. Um, but I don't know how well she's doing these days. It looks like she's a little stressed out about the condition of the US president and politics. So she's really taken this seriously. I mean, she really wants the president to do better. So she said in a tweet, Joe works tirelessly, all caps tweet, right? She did all caps, so she's yelling. Joe works tirelessly to work with Congress and pass bills to help everyday Americans. And he's hit from Dems on right and left. They cause gridlock. While GOP sit and plan how to pick your bones clean if we fail. GOP are Nazis in lockstep. It's difference between democracy and dictatorship. Well, Cher, must be tough living with all of this insane, restrictions around you. You can barely say what you mean, and here you are loving the president, and it's everyone's out to get him. I mean, if only he could do what he's capable of. If only people didn't get in his way. I mean, it would be the best, right? It would be amazing. Now, this tell of a boomer, right? This tell of a boomer looking to one of the last members of, and I guess Joe is on the border of being silent generation and a boomer, is he not? He's sort of on the border. Or maybe not. I mean, maybe he's a full boomer. I mean, that whole thing with the sports cars, and I guess he did have his youth in the 50s. So let's say he is a full step boomer. Here's what Cher is sharing with us all, right? That the position itself, right? The position itself of president, in her mind, because we're coming from, someone who grew up just after World War II, when these institutions worked, when the president really was, on the front lines messaging against communism, right? JFK was so powerful, even though he might have created a lot of the trouble with the Cold War in the first place, of course, because, when you go back to Eisenhower's military-industrial complex, what he's really worried about at that time, and if you read some of the biographies and what was going on at the time, is that JFK went hard on the missile gap with Russia as his main plank for his campaign. He said the missile gap exists. They have way more missiles than we do. We got to build more missiles and go at it. Now, Eisenhower, having known the military and the buildup from the World Wars, being the supreme commander, understood quickly that the military itself had other incentives, and they weren't necessarily to, just beat the Soviet Union in the Cold War. It was also to make a lot of bombs in the process, right? And so JFK was a vehicle for that. I don't think much of that is disputed, right? I don't think there's much dispute about missile gap being appropriated by the Kennedy campaign in order to get in the newspapers, right, and to stoke fear. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Eisenhower said absolutely wrong. We did not need the missile gap. There was absolutely no way it mattered. And in fact, when he was leaving the office, there was, of course, the military-industrial speech, but he also privately would say, Was it all worth it? Did I lose everything because this platform has, brought the Democrats back to power? So this problem had been around, um, for quite a while of these institutions that are able to live off of political favor and the messaging that comes with it, right? And so Cher is just another example of a boomer who believes in these boomers entirely, right? Um, but it's not so simple any longer, right? It isn't just a popularity contest, and it isn't just about a person fulfilling the role of president that you remembered when you were a kid, right? That's what's not there anymore, right? So we got this guy, and he's taken on the position of president, but the job itself is no longer the same as it was in the 1960s, right? The job itself has altered so much. And we can see some of the perversions, some of the ill effects of the system we have, particularly because we have once again we've wedded monetary policy with the political system, right? So there's a great article today, and we'll get a little more in, on the Bitcoin part, about how Bitcoin can fix this. But let's take an example right now of supply chains, right? So everyone's talking about how there's not going to be much of a Christmas this year, or there risks being fewer Christmas gifts because ports are slammed. On Medium today, a fellow named Ryan Johnson, and it's got a lot of play on the internet, on Twitter. A lot of people are sharing it today. And it's titled, "I'm a 20-year truck driver. I will tell you why America's shipping crisis will not end." So Ryan goes on to explain more or less this graph that I've created here, right? So this is somewhat simplified version of what's in the article. And what he explains is there are three. So what he's trying to do in the article is explain why we have the problems we have and why they're going to continue, right? So problems we have, why they're going to continue. He paints this following picture, right? So here's the port's flow. And anytime one of these trucks are going into the port, there are three lines, okay? There's a line in, right? There's a line in. And there you're going to get your chassis and your container after, right? So you got to wait in line to get in the port. This used to be, 15, 20 minutes, regularly an hour, but now it's in the multiple hours, right? It's in the multiple hours. From there, you go here and you pick up the chassis and the container, right? Used to be short, now also within a few hours. This should be the simple part, getting out. It is still relatively simple, not too many variables other than the lineup. But those are the three lines you have to wait in. What we're seeing today is that the lines for these are hours each, right? Because one is broken down, so this one slowed down, and so this one slowed down. And now, why are these individual lines broke down? Well, let's look at the variables that he mentions in each of these lines. In the first, it's the drivers, right? There's two variables with the drivers. Are they employees? They get paid by the hour. They don't mind waiting in lines too much. But not a lot of the drivers are that way. A lot of the drivers are contractors. So they're doing the load. They're getting paid by the load. So the amount of time they wait, irrelevant, doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't matter. So right away, there's people who are just wasting their time, right? They wait in line, they don't get paid anymore. So there's almost no incentive to wait in that line, right? Now, what do you do with your empty container from the last one? This is one of the major problems right now because the ports themselves have no longer any place to put these, right? And I guess you can explain that by the trade imbalance in the United States. We import so much and we export so little that of material hard goods, not food. America's a tremendous food exporter, so we're not talking about that. We're talking about just physical goods. And so what happens is they don't have any place for these containers, the empty ones, right? So they got to arrive with an empty one. There's no place to put them anymore at the port, so they got to find other places. They're dumping these things everywhere now. And you've seen some really amazing developments with Twitter showing how it essentially is our government now, for lack of a substitute, for lack of a more efficient process. But you get actual business owners. There's that fella, I can't remember her name. I'm following him for a while, Flexport CEO. And, he hired a boat, went all around. They said he was the first CEO to ever do that, went all around the port of LA and sort of diagnosed a lot of this stuff with the containers. And in real time was able to change a restriction in the state of, or in the city of Los Angeles, that limited the amount of empty containers, the height at which you can stack them, right? I think it said 2 or 3 was the legal limit. You couldn't stack them higher. So they, in real time, through Twitter, were able to fix that problem and say, okay, we're going to now allow you to stack them 6 high or something like that. I don't know the numbers, but it was, it was those kinds of magnitudes. But instantly, something solved, right? Something the government couldn't figure out, something that the instruments of government were unable to do. But Twitter and a couple of entrepreneurs and some government workers, right, were able to, and some policymakers and legislators were able to do this, which is amazing. But nevertheless, the empty containers still remain a major choke point, right? So one of the variables in line 1 that's also affected. The next is licenses, right? So it's the RFID tags and all the different things they make them get these days in order to have a legit truck. But really, the main variable, as far as I can tell, is the trade imbalance here, and then the government requirements are there, and they complicate things. But I don't think that's the one of the major holdups. But here, this distinction between employees, contractors, has really disincentivized a lot of drivers, right? That's why they have trouble getting the number of drivers they require in order to make this thing work better, because they've all kind of given up, right? They're not showing up. The incentives aren't there. It doesn't make any sense. And they're losing money, right? And it's below minimum wage at this point for what they're getting paid. Now you get in, right? You made it in. Empty thing, you made it in. Now, what are the variables? The chassis, right? They got to have the bottom to put the container on, right? So those things are a little hard to come by right now, just because they're poorly distributed, and all these other traffic jams have made them difficult to get. Now, here's the human aspect again, and here the drivers and the employees were an important variable. Here, it's the actual people who unpack, and these are always sort of low-skilled, not employees, contract workers, people who come in a bit here and there, more or less unreliable because of the incentives, right? It's not deemed very valuable work at all by the system, right? It's not favored, and they don't get paid much. And then, of course, cranes. Cranes is the other one. The amount of cranes. But this doesn't seem to be one of the worst problems at all the ports. It's probably a problem in a few of them. But there are idle cranes. You hear anecdotally that there are idle cranes. So, we should probably get more cranes. I'd say that's the ones that don't have them. But I don't know much about the cranes, so that's not really going to be my focus. But I wanted to list it here because it is one of the restrictions. So Ryan goes on to predict with all of this stuff. He explains it in a great Medium post, as I mentioned. But he makes a prediction, and this show really is, once again, I want to be very clear about predictions because it's important for me to publicly state them, and then hopefully, as audience grows in this show, I can have those tested, and we can backtrack and make sure we got things right, adjust if we need to, and move forward. But we're going to see how much we do get right. And Ryan says that nothing's going to change in the shipping crisis, and it's only going to get worse. What he says is that nobody in the supply chain wants to pay to solve the problem. They literally just won't pay, right? They won't pay. In an era of free money, in an era of printing, they won't pay. Okay. At the point we're at now, things are so backed up that the backups themselves cause container companies, ports, warehouses, and trucking companies to be able to charge massive increases for nothing. Right? For nothing. Container companies have already decreased the maximum allowable times before containers have to be back to the port. And if the congestion is so that's this part, right? The containers, the empty ones, right? So now they got to bring them back, but they actually can't bring them back in this line because they're not allowed in unless there's room for them once you get inside. There's never been room for them. That's why they had the one where they, stack them higher, right? They're stacking their things. So then it says, they do nothing. They're able to decrease the maximum time before you get them back. And if the congestion is so bad and you can't get it into the port when it's due, the container company can charge you massive late fees. The ports themselves will start to charge storage fees for not getting containers out on time. Storage charges alone can run into thousands of dollars a day. Warehouses can charge massive premiums for other services, and so can trucking companies. Chronic understaffing has led to this problem, but it is allowing the same companies to charge 10 times more for regular services. Since they're not paying the workers any more than they did last year or 5 years ago, the whole industry sits back and cashes in on the mess it created. In fact, the more things are backed up, the more every point of the supply chain cashes in. There is literally no incentive to change, even if it means consumers have to do holiday shopping in July and pay triple for shipping. This is the new normal. All brought to you by the experts running our supply chains. So, Cher, who's still of a mind that the president is there to do things and get things done. And I don't mean Biden and the brain troubles, right? It's not just that. Anyone who thought Trump was there to get, a lot of material things done. Not really, right? A lot of people liked him just because he shocked the system so badly that it was altering reality, right? Like people were ready to get rid of the U.S. political system just because of Trump, whether they liked him or not. Like a lot of people liked him just because it was poison, right? And I'm in the same boat as a Bitcoiner. I said I didn't understand how people could get triggered by Trump and still be Bitcoiners. I still can't understand that. Like, what's better for Bitcoin than Donald Trump? I have an answer. It is Joe Biden. Joe Biden is better, right? There's no way we can deny that. He's just better. In every way, he's better. But how could people have been triggered that Trump was unable to do X or Y or Z? Policies. Who cares about his policies? The policies were besides the point. The point was the memes and the triggering and the craziness, right? Because that's where we're at. Why should we take these things seriously? Why should we be like Cher, waiting for these guys to fix this thing? They're not going to fix this thing. They can't, right? They can't fix this thing. You're asking heroin addicts, right? Heroin addicts, people who are addicted to this system of money, printing, and not this thing where the people who are doing the work are not getting compensated. There is no real market feedback here. There's just a bunch of people involved at different points. There's different companies, there's individuals, there's the port, there's the shippers, there's the people out there. Everyone's here, but nobody's home, right? Everybody's here, but nobody's home. The only person that's making this thing not line up is the government, right? They're the people who say they're home. Now, let's take the parallel of Bitcoin. Also, nobody home. There's nobody home, right? There's no security, there's no budget, there's no marketing, there's none of that stuff, right? But it works because there's no one inside tipping the scales. There's no one inside knocking this thing out of its path. Now, Saifedean, author of the Bitcoin Standard, has the sequel to the Bitcoin Standard coming out shortly called the Fiat Standard, of course. And happily, Saifedean does explain the virtues of fiat currency. It's not just a dunk on fiat. He talks about the invention of fiat currency, the invention of central banking, and definitely does embrace that sort of entropy argument that it was an innovation when it came. It did good things when it started, but like all systems, entropy set in, and it's more than useless now. It's actually detrimental. And he has a few amazing quotes, right? And it's called, this is a chapter, chapter 2, called Fiat Life, right? And what he's trying to talk about here, I think gets to the heart of this problem, right? I think it gets to the heart of this problem, so I'll connect it. A few quotes that I took out. Instead of learning to be productive, fiat teaches you to play politics. Instead of work being rewarded based on its productivity, it is instead rewarded based on artificial status games. The development of money allows humans to provide for the future and to think of long term. The harder the money, the more reliably we can provide for the future. The less uncertain the future is, the more it is possible to think and plan for the future. When money is controlled by government, this market process is perverted. The profit and loss mechanism is severely restricted. The requirement for survival is no longer productivity, but political acceptability. Political acceptability. Now think about that. You think any of these people have any political value? You think these people are valued by anyone? These are the fat deplorables, right? These people are sick to look at. They're disgusting. And they are. I mean, I love them, but they're disgusting, right? Like I've been to America, you know, I live there regularly. Um, I hope the best for them, and I pray for them, and I'm willing to spend a lot of my time to help and make life better for everyone. But we can't deny that the people involved in this industry are unpleasant, right? To look at or other, and so there's no real concern for them, right? There's no real concern. And so my prediction now is, here's my prediction, right? We're going to have one of the first sort of Bitcoin Christmases, right? Um, the ability, the benefits that the system we have brought to the few, not few, it was a majority. It was actually a majority. A majority of Americans have been able to benefit from the system. So we don't want to say that it's all bad, right? We've had tons of gifts over the years. We've had the most blessed Christmases as a culture in the history of the world, right? Um, but the way we practice Christmas, right? The way we practice Christmas was a reflection of our political economic system. It's all the Chinese things, made in China, to plastic, made in Hong Kong, this went on for years. It's not going to stop necessarily tomorrow, right? But it went on for years. And every year, I'd say kids got more and more presents. I know I did when I was a kid, and that was a whole nother era. Right now, there's tons of individuals stopping, but I'm talking about the major mega thrust of this, right? The mega thrust. And so when I say it's a Bitcoin Christmas, all I mean is, even in my own family, we're reorienting our way of thinking around it. There's gifts, of course, right? We've already bought some, and but it's not exactly the point, right? The point is, um, I'm even thinking about just giving straight Bitcoin to people for Christmas instead of all this stuff, and just get rid of the gifts and whatnot, right? So we'll see. But the point inevitably is, um, when I say it's a Bitcoin Christmas, I mean it almost in the opposite sense. It's going to be such a bad Christmas for people who don't know about Bitcoin and who are unaware of these troubles, who are unaware of the rot and the decay, and are unable to predict that this is coming, right? That force, I believe, will radicalize more people to Bitcoin, right? If the fiat system can't even dump presents under your tree, what's it good for, right? Honestly, what's it good for? And so that's the prediction, right? The prediction is the market will continue to grow high towards Christmas just because everyone is going to realize this whole thing doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. So that's the prediction for today. I hope you liked it. I hope this was a useful graph, and I hope the Bitcoin fiat standard quotes were helpful. And let's not forget that it's hard for people to put all these dots together, right? It's easy to just say, "Oh, it's fiat is the problem," and da 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 da. But to understand why fiat is the problem is to understand why these incentives break down and how these incentives can be realigned simply by breaking up with the fiat system and embracing the greatest financial asset ever created, the one that really makes it obvious that time is money, right? Because this money is time. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.